All right. Hello. Welcome back to another reading of Under the Oak Tree by Suji Kim. This is volume 1. I haven't done this in a while. Got a beautiful book. Love how it's made. All right. As always, we're going to read the little message at the beginning. A note from Suji Kim as our little warning. To my readers, this story grapples with many difficult and complex themes. The content includes depictions of physical and mental abuse, as well as themes of trauma and emotional distress experienced by the characters. Certain scenes may be disturbing and triggering for some readers. Reader discretion is advised. The story also contains explicit sexual content that may not be suitable for all audiences. Please approach this content with care and seek support if needed. For any readers who see themselves in this tale, my hope is that it provides you with the comfort, courage, and the knowledge that you are not alone. Suji Kim. Okay. We are on chapter 5. The chapters are quite long, so this is probably going to take about an hour. Here we go, chapter 5. Unfortunately, the rain began to subside in the evening, and by dawn it had ceased. Maxi squinted at the bright morning sun and tried to rise, but her limbs gave way as if her bones had evaporated within them. When she groaned quietly at the dull aching, a large hand stroked the length of her back. "Go back to sleep," Riftan said softly. The glare of the morning sun cast stark shadows over his sculpted face. He was already dressed and fully armored. Maxi gazed up at him, transfixed even as her heart sank. Are you leaving already?" Riftan nodded. "We leave at noon, but first we must prepare weapons and rations for the journey." He lifted her chin and tenderly kissed her swollen lips, then stepped back from the bed and pulled on a pair of silvery white steel gauntlets and forearm guards before picking up his sword. "I'll come and see you before I leave. Go back to sleep." He picked up his sword on the way out the door. Maxi stared as the door closed behind him, a wave of emptiness sweeping through her. She rose from the bed with shaky steps and asked Ludus to draw her a bath. Some time later, Ludus and 3 maidservants entered the room carrying a bathtub filled with steaming water. It was only with their help that Maxi managed to step in and lower herself into the water. Ludus washed her hair and lathered her body with a soft, soapy sponge. Though she was mortified, Maxi did not refuse her help, knowing that she lacked the strength to bathe herself. As one of the other maidservants dried her hair with a towel, she stopped suddenly. "Excuse me for a moment, my lady," she said. "I will bring you a high-necked dress." A deep blush spread across Maxi's face. Red splotches dotted her body where Riftan's mouth had been particularly attentive, making her look like she had contracted the pox. Thank you." When the servants left the room, Maxi stood in front of the mirror and gingerly unwrapped her towel. Her neck was covered in red marks, and her breasts also bore dark rose-colored spots. With trembling hands, she reached for her breasts. They had felt entirely different under Riftan's touch. She stared at the bright-eyed, flushed woman in the mirror. Was this truly the same pale, morose girl with slumped shoulders? Her hands traveled down to the curve of her waist and her smooth abdomen before reaching the soft region between her thighs. It was moist and warm there, but she felt as if she were touching a stranger's body. "I've brought you a dress, my lady." Startled by the voice at the door, Maxi hastily withdrew her hands from her body. Her face burned as she stammered a reply. "Come in." A maidservant entered the room and with practiced hands helped Maxi into a beautiful green dress that rippled with gold. A golden belt was fastened around her waist, and her damp hair was tied up with a silken green ribbon. Before the servant could adorn her with jewels, Maxi thanked her and hurriedly left the room. Riftan said that he would see her before he left, but she was worried that he might forget his promise. Sunbeams streamed through the open windows and warmed Maxi's face as she skipped down the stairs. The air smelled pleasantly of rain. "Good morning, my lady," Rodrigo greeted her with a bow when she reached the bottom of the stairs. Behind him, maid servants swept the floors and aired out the hall, now that the rain had stopped. Rodrigo supervised them with hawk-like eyes while he spoke with Maxi. "Breakfast is served, my lady," he said. "Would you like to have it in the dining hall?" No, I can eat later. I wanted to see Riftan. I mean, Lord Calypso. The Lord is at the training grounds with the knights." Maxi nodded and was about to leave the hall when a worrisome thought occurred to her. What would she do when she found Riftan? She would only get in his way. Rodrigo noticed her hesitating at the door and approached her. "My lady, if I may." Rodrigo cleared his throat before continuing. "Could I trouble you to inform the Lord that lunch is ready? The kitchen has been busy since dawn, preparing a proper feast for the knights before they embark on their journey." Certainly, Maxi exclaimed. The old steward was visibly relieved that Maxi did not find his request impudent. "Thank you, my lady." Overjoyed to have an excuse to see Riftan, Maxi rushed out without another word. The gentle autumn breeze was cool against her skin, and she paused to glance up at the pale sun before walking past the pavilion and down the stairs. She bunched up her skirt to avoid the silvery puddles scattered across the garden, and soon arrived at the inner gates. A sentry hastily raised his hand in salute as Maxi passed by, and skipped down another set of stairs. The vast training grounds were surrounded by tall, thick walls, and inside, knights clad in shining armor stood in orderly lines before Riftan. Maxi halted in her tracks. They seemed to be in the middle of a serious discussion. She recognized Gable, the young knight with a gift for storytelling, as he stepped forward and spoke to Riftan. "Commander, if it is the safety of Anatole that concerns you, allow me to stay behind. With a Red Dragon Knight here, you'll have nothing to worry about." "No," Riftan said. "All knights who participated in the Dragon campaign must attend the celebration. The honor must equally be shared." "I have no interest in wealth or titles," Gable said. "I've already made a name for myself as a knight, and I've received more than enough praise for my achievements. I'd rather remain here, protecting Anatole, than waste my time at tedious festivities." "Do you really mean all that?" Heberon shook his head in disbelief. "All the ladies of the court will be falling at your feet. With that silver tongue of yours, you could even make the proudest lady swoon." Only an ascetic would throw away such a chance." "You're a frivolous fool, as always," Ricardo said, his voice sharp with disapproval. "Is there a brain in that giant head of yours, or is it filled with only vulgar thoughts?" "What did you say?" As Heberon and Ricardo glared at each other, Ruth sighed at Riftan's side. "Are the two of you cursed to die of plague if you go a single day without bickering?" Ruth clicked his tongue in annoyance and continued. "Sir Riftan is right. No knight who fought in the campaign should miss the celebration. Sir Oberon, Sir Sebrique, and the sentries will be here to guard Anatole, and I plan to stay behind as well." "What are you talking about?" Ricardo turned from scowling at Heberon to face Ruth. "As Anatole's sorcerer, you played a crucial role in the battle. You must go with us." "Fame and heroism do not become me," Ruth said with a shrug. "Besides, my presence in the capital will cause conflict among court sorcerers. I'm an outcast among my peers. Or have you forgotten that I left the Mage Tower without permission?" The knights rolled their eyes as if this was something Ruth brought up frequently. So how could they have forgotten? After listening to the exchange in silence, Riftan finally spoke. It would certainly ease my mind if you stayed, Ruth. That was always my intention, the sorcerer said with another shrug. Riftan straightened and turned to address the gathered knights. It's decided then. We leave as soon as the preparations are complete. We'll take the route we discussed earlier. The knights touched their fists to their chests, then lowered them back to their sides. The gesture seemed to be the customary salute of their order. As the conversation came to a close, Maxi quietly approached Riftan, pretending not to notice the knight stealing glances at her as she stepped up to his side. When Riftan noticed her, his brows came together. I told you to rest this morning. Is something wrong? No, it was time for me to rise. She felt suddenly shy, her chest constricting as she considered her next words. Rodrigo said the lunch is ready. So I came to tell you. The worry melted from Riftan's face, and he looked towards the sky, gauging the time by the angle of the sun. We'll eat first, he called to the knights, who quickly dispersed at the mention of food. Riftan wrapped an arm around Maxi's shoulders, and they began to walk back together. She peeked up at his handsome face. He stood tall under the bright sun, a dashing figure in silver armor and a navy blue tunic, as if he had strolled out of a temple mural depicting a magnificent hero, who was it was no wonder that his subjects called him the incarnation of Wigru, the legendary knight who had ascended to the heavens. Are you all right? Riftan asked. I'm fine. Maxi hastily fixed her eyes on the grounds ahead of them. You looked like you were in pain the last time we made love. Her face burned as if it had suddenly caught fire. I feel fine. I wish you would say that in bed as well, he said, frowning. Tell me it's fine when I ask for more. Riftan? Maxi looked around, afraid that someone might overhear them. The knights, however, were all far ahead of them. With effort, she regained her composure and gave Riftan a stern look. You shouldn't say such things out here. What if someone hears? So what if someone hears? She wanted to say that people would think they were shameless and debauched, but her tongue tied itself into a knot. Instead, she teared up in embarrassment. It was undeniable, after all, that they had spent the last few days engaged in endless and indecent lovemaking. Riftan burst into laughter and drew her in close. Oh, my sweet innocent lady, he said, brushing his lips against hers. The chill in his armor seeped in through Maxi's clothes, and she shivered against the cold, even as her pulse quickened. Don't make it so hard for me to leave you, Riftan whispered. Maxi gazed up at him, suppressing the urge to ask if he would truly miss her. If she was not so afraid of irritating him and shattering this sweet moment, she would have asked him to bring her to the capital. Reining in her emotions, Maxi tried to speak with poise. We should hurry to lunch. You need to eat. Yes, let's go. Riftan pulled away from her, and Maxi tried her hardest. This is a adult novel. Tristan Tate. It is, there are sex scenes. That is why it's an 18+ stream. There are a lot of sex scenes. There's at least like one sex scene per chapter. I mean, I'm not the police. Also, it kind of depends on what country you're in. Oh man. Yeah, it has sex scenes. That's all. That's the reason why it's 18+. No, we're not gonna play with that. Sorry, I have a kitten. Hi. It is a book, yes. It's an adult novel, but it's a book. I mean, it's like kind of Game of Thrones-y. Touche. Yeah. Anyway, it's a great book, by the way. It's my favorite. And it literally just came out late last year in November, so it's brand new. There is a comic out for it though. Hey, sweet baby. Ow. Say hi. All right, I'm going to continue reading. I'll keep an eye on chat, though, for you. Let's see. Riftan pulled away from her, and Maxi tried her hardest to repress the desire to cling to him as they made their way to the dining hall. After lunch, the knights left the hall and mounted their horses in the courtyard. Maxi followed them out to send Riftan off, and the servants lined up on the stairs. Riftan sat elegantly atop his black stallion and tugged at its reins, slowly turning it around so that he could meet Maxi's gaze. I'll be back soon. Please be careful. Her murmur was almost unintelligible, but he smiled and leaned dangerously low in his saddle so that he could stroke her face. Though Maxi could feel the servant's eyes on them, she did not shy away from his touch. Maxi stood on the tips of her toes, and their lips touched lightly before locking together in a deep kiss. Riftan's tongue gently explored her mouth, and then, as if nothing had happened, he pulled away and sat up straight, leading his horse away from her and to the front of the party. The knights who had been watching their commander in disbelief turned and followed him wordlessly. Blushing but unbothered, Maxi watched as they passed through the gates and crossed the moat in a single file, then climbed the stairs up to the ramparts to watch until their silhouettes shrank into the distance. As the long train of men passed below, the sentries on the walls blew their horns. The rich sound of the copals reverberated through the air, forming a discordant harmony with the clopping of hooves. Long after the knights and their horses had disappeared over the horizon, Maxi stood unmoving on the walls, gazing at the place where Riftan had passed out of sight. So since Riftan has left Anatole, I don't think there's going to be another sex scene for at least this chapter. Also, as for the homeless thing, I am no longer homeless, thankfully. I am actually moving into my new place on the 3rd of February, so I will have to be changing the Streamlabs thing. Back to the story. After Riftan's departure, Maxi fell ill, and she was confined to her bed for 2 days. She hadn't rested enough during the previous days, and the recent flurry of activity, combined with her accumulated fatigue, finally caught up to her. The maidservants attended to her diligently, providing steady doses of herbal soup and damp towels to cool her fever. When her condition improved 3 days later, Maxi asked Ludus to draw her a bath, hoping to feel refreshed after washing off the sweat of her illness. "Shouldn't we call the cleric, my lady?" asked Ludus. Maxi shook her head as she shed her gown and stepped into the tub. "I feel better now." Ludus hovered near the tub, her voice filled with concern. "But I don't know if the herbs the sorcerer gave us are enough. Perhaps we should call a healer instead, and I'm really all right. It was just a fever," Maxi said, forcing a smile to reassure Ludus. In truth, she had not fully recovered yet, but her fever had broken. A day of light exercise and nourishing food would surely restore her strength. After her bath, she put on her newly tailored dress and draped a warm shawl over her shoulders before heading out to the garden. A sharply chill wind greeted her, and Maxi hugged her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. The temperature had dropped so quickly in just a few days. Ludus smiled at her astonishment. "The days turn cold once the autumn rains have passed." "It feels like it's already winter," Maxi said, rubbing warmth into her arms. "Anatole's winters are mild compared to the winters in other regions," Ludus said, still smiling at her. "We're close to the southern sea, so it rarely snows. Even in midwinter, when it does, we only get flurries." Maxi's shoulders slumped in disappointment. Despite her efforts to hide it, her father's lands were in the warm southeastern regions, so she had never seen a proper snowfall. Dracium, the royal capital, was said to regularly see enough snowfall to cover the entire continent, and she wondered if it would be snowing there by the time Riften arrived. "You shouldn't linger outside too long, my lady," Ludus said, interrupting Maxi's snowy thoughts. "You've only just recovered." Maxi smiled and nodded. "I just wanted to walk a little." Ludus seldom spoke unless it was necessary. When she did, it was always out of concern, as if Maxi were her younger sister. "This really is my home now." As she walked, Maxi took in Calypso's castle with fresh eyes and recalled her solitary life at Croyso Castle. Imagining the new experiences that awaited her here in Anatole, her heart fluttered with hope so that her chest felt too small to contain it. Could she really pave a new life for herself? The brief hope sputtered out so that her chest just hurt. Her new surroundings hadn't transformed her into a different person. She still stuttered. She still knew nothing about running an estate. Riften would one day realize that she was foolish and useless. Then everything would change. He might even come to hate her, just like her father. The thought of losing Riften's affection froze her blood. "My lady, are you feeling unwell?" Ludus had noticed her agitation, and her brow creased with concern again. Maxi tried to shake off her doubts. "I'm fine. I'd like to have a warm cup of tea." "I'll prepare it at once, my lady." Maxi turned around to begin the walk back and tried to collect herself. "I'll change. I'll become a proper lady for this castle. I'll become someone Riften can depend on." The next day, Maxi received a visit from the merchant, Aderon. After a long deliberation, she chose white marble with a jade sheen for the banquet hall floor, and masterfully crafted transparent glass for the castle windows. Construction was set to begin the next day, and Aderon assured Maxi that the masons from his guild would arrive on time. Afterward, Maxi headed straight to the library with the receipt from Aderon in hand. She attempted to record the transaction in her ledger using Rodrigo's accounting books as a guide, but she was only able to achieve a clumsy imitation of the steward's records. By the time she managed to complete the list of purchased items and their costs, it was dark outside. The days that followed were hectic as construction began on the castle. Many repairs were needed, and there was no end to the list of required items. Early each morning, Maxi met with Aderon to discuss the refurbishments and approve the purchase of additional tools as needed. After their meeting, they would supervise the workers, observing the progress of each project. In the afternoons, Maxi met with the landscaper to review the plans for the gardens. Then she examined designs for the window frames and railings with the artisans. But her day did not end there. Each day brought a jumble of new receipts for salaries, materials, and tools. And Maxi worked late into the... Oh! Crap! Did you press anything? No computer. No computer. Thank you. Crap, where was I? In the afternoons, Maxi met with the landscaper to review the plans for the gardens. Then she examined designs for the window frames and railings with the artisans. But her day did not end there. Each day brought a jumble of new receipts for salaries, materials, and tools, and Maxi worked late into the night recording them into the ledger. "My lady, you look exhausted," Ludus said to her one morning. "You should rest." But Maxi shook her head determinedly. "I'm fine," she said, and headed down to examine the latest shipment of goods from the Merchant Guild. Aderon and his workers arrived at precisely the appointed hour with a large horse-drawn wagon. The merchant flung back the wagon's leather canvas, revealing its contents to Maxi. "These are the marble slabs for the floor, my lady, and the tools needed to lay them." "And for the windows?" "The guild branch in Anatole lacks the required quantity of the high-quality glass that you've requested," Aderon explained, his face regretful. "It will need to be shipped from the capital or from Livadon. For now, I shall send a message to see if we can purchase the glass in bulk." He spoke as if he was granting a favor, and Maxi almost thanked him, but she caught herself. Quietly frustrated with her servile attitude, She led Aderon to the drawing room, where the merchant launched into a long-winded explanation of construction times and costs before the maid could even serve them tea. Maxi tried to memorize every detail, but when Aderon began to rattle off the names of foreign currencies, her head spun. Struggling to keep up with his calculations, Maxi did her best to keep track of the currency rates. 1 soldem was worth 20 lirim, and 20 lirim were equal to 240 dirham, or 12 dinar. This meant that 30 dinar were worth... "Oh dear," Aderon said, just as Maxi thought her head would burst. "It seemed I got carried away in my excitement. Please forgive me." She forced a smile. It's all right. My poor nerves just won't calm down to think that I'm contributing to the refurbishment of the great Lord Calypso's castle. Thank you for your hard work." Hearing this dismissal, Aderon awkwardly rose from his seat. As soon as he was gone, Maxi dashed to the library with the parchment listing the latest expenses from the merchant. Just recording the workers' wages took her several hours, and she was still hard at work when a rustle interrupted her exhausted sigh. Maxi whirled toward the sound, and a man emerged from behind a pile of books in the corner. Ruth? Maxi stared at him blankly, unsure of what else to say. How long had he been there? The sorcerer scratched his light gray hair absently and gave her a bleary-eyed look. He appeared to have been napping in the collection of precious books. "Why has there been so much commotion lately?" Ruth complained, unperturbed by the fact that the lady of the castle had caught him sleeping on the library floor. "We're refurbishing the castle." "Yes, I know about the castle, but I was asking about you, Lady Calypso." Me? You've been sighing and muttering to yourself in the library for days. Are you aware that you are disrupting my sleep?" Maxi stared at him, mouth agape. Should she be mortified that someone else had watched as she tore at her hair over simple equations? Indignant that Ruth had not made his presence known? Or amazed that he had the audacity to reproach her when he was the one sleeping where he should not be? At a loss for words, Maxi opened her mouth only to close it soon after. Ruth stood up and approached her. Is this a ledger? Maxi hastily tried to gather the mess of papers scattered across the table, but she was too slow. Ignoring her attempt to hide the documents, Ruth picked up a few sheets and examined them. He frowned. Just how many miscalculations are there? Give it back. She tried to snatch the papers from him, but he simply turned around and raised them above her reach. 12 lirim for 1 marble tile? He groaned quietly as he examined her work. Surely that's a mistake. Please tell me you've written the wrong unit here. I was just about to correct it, Maxi said frantically. Ruth seemed to be on the verge of a fit. With narrowed eyes, he snatched away the accounting book she had hidden behind her back. Maxi gaped at his insolence. A true gentleman would never touch a lady's belongings without her permission. Give those back, Maxi demanded. Her face flushed with anger as she pulled at his sleeve. How dare you? How much gold have you spent in the last few days? Maxi flinched, her heart sinking into the pit of her stomach at Ruth's frightfully harsh tone. Just how much? The sorcerer bit off each word in a short, angry burst. Well, cold sweat trickled down Maxi's back. Riftan said not to worry about the cost, but you should still keep track of how much you've spent. His sharp tone made her face burn. She avoided his gaze, feeling as humiliated as she had when her tutor scolded her for stuttering. I don't know exactly how much. Do you have an estimate? She slowly shook her head. Ruth rubbed his temples in obvious annoyance. Maxi briefly wondered if he had the right to admonish her, but the fear that she had made some grave mistake overrode the thought. After a long pause, she decided to confess. I'm not used to handling such matters. Then you should have asked for help. He was right. Maxi stared at her toes, feeling like an utter fool. How much of it is wrong? The ledger is a complete mess. Some items are impossibly cheap, while others are ridiculously overpriced. The calculations are all wrong. Ruth pointed to a page in the ledger. And do you see this list of expenses? None of it is essential. You've made too many unnecessary purchases. The dragon campaign may have brought Sir Riftan a massive fortune, but gold shouldn't be spent like water. We need funds to pay the knights and guards of Anatole, Ruth continued, almost breathless with the flood of his words. Not to mention next year's construction of the new road connecting the village to the port. Come winter, tax revenues will fall. We must not waste gold. Maxi shrank away like a turtle withdrawing into its shell. I didn't know. I was never told. Riftan just told to do as I wished. As her stammering trailed off, Ruth's shoulders slumped and he sighed loudly. I'm not saying that the castle shouldn't be refurbished, he said. Too great a focus was given to the castle's fortifications, and its furnishings were neglected. The place looks more like a military base than a lord's residence. But if you continue to spend this lavishly, Lord Riftan will need to battle another dragon to rebuild his wealth. That's... Maxi gripped the back of the chairs to steady herself. She wished to refurbish the castle only so that Riftan might be pleased with her. It was a task he had asked her to do. The thought that her efforts might anger him instead brought her close to tears, and she felt the blood drain from her face. Get my water. Please tell me what I did wrong, she pleaded with Ruth. I'll correct my mistakes. Ruth rubbed his temples, but eventually returned to his attention to the ledger. As he flipped through it, Maxi hung her head low like a scolded child. When he began to sift through the pile of receipts, Ruth sighed deeply and ran a hand down his face. I don't even know where to start, my lady. Are these all the receipts? Suppressing her desire to dig a hole in the ground and bury herself, Maxi managed to respond, Yes, they are. He narrowed his eyes at the pile of parchment, then closed the ledger with a thud. It's late, he said sullenly. Let's continue tomorrow. You could show me now. Look at the state of this ledger. It isn't something we can take care of in a day. Maxi could hear his teeth grinding. There was nothing more she could say. Crestfallen, she nodded. The next morning, Maxi rushed to the library as soon as she awoke, eager to begin work on the ledger. You're early, Ruth greeted her with a yawn. Maxi narrowed her eyes at him. She could tell by his unkempt appearance that he had slept in the corner of the library again. Meanwhile, she had slipped out of her room at sunrise just to avoid being humiliated by Ruth's sharp tongue in front of the servants. She had barely had enough time to wash her face, but here was the sorcerer lounging about without a care in the world. Ruth rose from his corner and sat down at the desk. Let's have a look at the list of purchases first. We must cancel unnecessary orders at once. The merchant will come this afternoon. Tell me what I should cancel, and I'll do it. Maxi seated herself across from him, running her fingers through her uncombed hair. Very well, he said, organizing the receipts by date. Maxi clutched her skirt while he inspected them. 12 lirum for a slab of marble that is 2 cavets long and wide, he recited from the ledger. You've written the wrong currency here. It was 12 dirham, not lirum, and considering the cost of construction, that's a rather inexpensive price. Hey, would you quit? Put this up here. She sighed in relief, but Ruth was not finished. Tapping the desk with the tips of his fingers, he continued his review with painstaking detail. Is it really necessary to change the flooring of the banquet hall and the great hall to marble? The flagstones are only a few years old. He paused, considering. I suppose there's nothing to be done now since construction has already started, and Lord Calypso does deserve some luxury, so we'll just leave that be. But construction on the great hall hasn't begun yet. There's still time to cancel. If you please, milady, he replied dryly and flipped the page. Nothing else seems amiss. Banisters, railings for the balcony, window frames, curtains and carpets, tapestries, furniture, chandeliers, sculptures, a fountain. Fountain? His flat voice rose sharply, and Maxi flinched as if he had lashed her across the back. Ruth whipped his head up, his eyes demanding an answer. Maxi looked at the floor, stammering excuses in a barely audible voice. The merchants said it would look splendid in the garden. Do you know how much work it takes to maintain a fountain? The plumbing alone requires large-scale construction, and the fountain is to be made of marble and crystal? This accursed merchant is trying to swindle the Calypso estate. Maxi shrank away from his outrage. But the admonishment didn't end there. What are you doing? Oh my god. Whose idea was it to use high-quality glass panes for all the windows? Only Roman emperors would pay for such extravagance. Have you any idea how expensive glass is? The windows of Croyso Castle were all glass. Your father is easily one of the wealthiest people in the 7 kingdoms. Ruth pinched the bridge of his nose before continuing. But it's not just a question of affordability. This type of glass window is impractical for Anatol's climate because it can't insulate against the cold. It would be no different from keeping the windows open in the winter. And don't forget, my lady, the knights' training grounds are in the courtyard. The day will come when one of those fools misfires his blade aura and shatters these expensive windows while showing off. Besides, glass scratches easily, and the servants will have to work twice as hard to keep it polished. We're short-handed as it is. These points had never crossed Maxi's mind. She remained silent. Ruth's voice softened only after he finished examining the receipts. I see that not everything listed here has been ordered yet, he said. Let's replace the windows in the Great Hall, Banquet Hall, and a few of the guest rooms with high-quality glass. He pulled out a fresh piece of parchment and drew a blueprint of the castle, indicating the halls and rooms he had mentioned. Vault glass or a double covering can be used for the remaining rooms. Adding shutters would be practical as well, so that the windows can occasionally be opened for airflow during the winter. That should be more than sufficient for convincing visitors of our wealth. Maxi listened, nodding at each solution he outlined. I understand. I'll tell the merchant. And that crystal fountain isn't even worth discussing, he said, discarding the piece of parchment listing the fountain's costs and materials. He dipped a quill in ink and opened the ledger to a fresh page. Now, my lady, Ruth said, handing her the quill, let's try recording the purchases again, without the overpriced items this time. Maxi nervously eyed the quill. She had expected Ruth to take matters into his own hands. What if I make more mistakes? You'll need to keep account in the future. If you make a mistake, I'll help you correct it. But you should have a try first, my lady. She nodded and took the quill, but her mind went blank as she stared at the ledger, unable to recall anything she had learned. Maxi sifted through the receipts in panic, taking a breath to compose herself. Maxi decided to start with the oldest receipt and began copying the items' names and expenditures. This time, her records included the number of workers hired, their wages, and the length of their contracts, in addition to the quantity and cost of purchased materials. What is she doing? Oh my god. As the calculations grew more complex, a cold sweat beaded on Maxi's skin. She added, and added again. But how much was each currency worth? The more she thought about it, the more confused she became. After silently watching her struggle, Ruth intervened, his voice apprehensive. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but it seems you don't know the currency conversions? I do, Maxi insisted, tightening her grip around the quill. Ruth gave her a dubious look, and Maxi's mouth went dry. It's just that I never bought anything for myself. So I got a little confused. Hi. How much is 60 lirum in soldum? Maxi hurriedly counted on her fingers and blurted out the first answer she came to. 4. As Ruth's eyes narrowed, she inhaled sharply and corrected herself. 3. How much is 24 dinar in soldum then? How many dirham coins would you get for 10 lirum? Ruth's continued scrutiny had Maxi on the verge of tears, and her face burned with shame. He's realized that I'm utterly incompetent. He knows that I'm hopeless. What if he tells Riftan that I'm just as I appear, a stupid, stuttering fool? As she lowered her head in defeat, Ruth clutched his head and groaned. Not even Princess Agnes was this ignorant about worldly affairs. Has your life been that sheltered? Maxi bit her lip, but did not answer. Ruth, too, was silent. Finally, he heaved a sigh and pulled a small pouch from his robe. You are making this very difficult. You are making this very, very difficult. Hi. You're lucky it says nobody's watching. You little shit. I love you. Can I read the book, please? Look closely, he said as he fished 2 silver coins from the pouch. One was large, its diameter as wide as her little finger was long, and it was impressed with the image of a bird spreading its wings. The other coin was small and thin, only as wide as a single joint of her index finger. Ruth tapped the larger coin. This is a lirum, the currency minted during the Roman Empire and circulated widely across the continent. The smaller coin is a dirham. 12 dirham make 1 lirum. He paused, making sure Maxi understood before continuing. The dirham originated in Lacazette. On the southern continent, trade with the southern realms has increased in recent years, so we're seeing an influx of these coins. They may be small, but they are stable and carry much value. Maxi examined the small coin, placing it in her palm so she could see it up close. She had never held money before, and so wanted to memorize its details. Satisfied that she was following along, Ruth resumed his lesson. On a scale, it takes exactly 12 dirham to balance the weight of 1 lirum, which is why the exchange is 12 dirham for a lirum. The next coins that came out of Ruth's pouch were gold. One was the size of a lirum and the other the size of a dirham. This large coin is a soldum. Like the lirum, it's been in circulation since the Roman Empire. The smaller gold coin is a dinar, and it is from Lacazette. Like the smaller silver coins, a soldum weighs as much as 12 dinar, so the conversion is the same from the lirum to the dirham, 1 to 12. Why do they produce such small coins on the southern continent? Ruth scrunched his nose in annoyance. Because trade there is far more developed than it is here. If the coins carry too much value, trade between individuals wouldn't be possible. Sensing that the sorcerer was explaining things that should be obvious to her, Maxi chose not to inquire further. She was not sure she understood the nuances of trade and currencies, but waited for Ruth to continue. Gold is 20 times more valuable than silver. so 1 soldum can be exchanged for 20 lirum, and 1 dinar for 20 dirham. Maxi struggled to wrap her head around the conversion rates. So this small gold coin, a dinar was it? How much is 1 dinar in lirum? There's no precise conversion. 5 lirum are worth 3 dinar. Ruth slid a gold dinar and a silver lirum across the table. She quickly began scribbling notes on a spare piece of parchment, and Ruth watched her for a few moments before sighing softly. You were likely confusing lirum and dinar in your dealings with the merchant. The soldum is rarely used on account of being too valuable, while the dirham is worth too little to be considered practical for large-scale transactions. Trade between noble houses and merchants is usually conducted in lirum, the Roman silver coin, or in dinar, the gold coin from Lakazim. Like I said, lirum and dinar do not convert neatly. Since breaking the coins into pieces isn't an option, traders often convert them into dirham to simplify things. As long as you keep track of these conversions, your calculations should be accurate. Oh my god. Maxi nodded, dejected. I didn't know that there was so many kinds of coins. You've only seen a fraction of them, my lady. Balto in the north and Saikin in the east have their own currencies. Their coins' purity and weight are identical to that of soldum and lirum, but it's best that you still take note of their appearance. Ruth searched his pockets and then scratched his head. Unfortunately, I don't have any samples with me. Next time, perhaps. Maxi stared at him with dread. More currencies only meant more confusion. If they're worth the same as soldum and lirum, is there really a need to see them? Ruth nodded. More and more lords have been minting their own coins to show off their wealth and power, but most of them are made from impure alloys containing lead or copper. These must be rejected in transactions. Coins from Balto or Sikin, on the other hand, are pure and reliable. Come next spring, merchants from these kingdoms will arrive in Anatole, so you do well to familiarize yourself with their currencies beforehand. I see. The soldum, lirum, dinar, dirham, and copper shekel widely used by the commoners are among the most reliable currencies. And there's the dant, which is used only by the elite. You should remember those at the very least. Maxi's ears perked up at the mention of the dant. She had heard of it in passing before. How much is a dant worth? It's the most valuable currency in the world, issued during the golden age of the Roman Empire. They're book-sized. Hold on. They're book-sized, resembling metal plates more than coins. And they're made of orichalcum. Orichalcum. As such, they're exceedingly rare. Only 600 exist across the continent, and 160 of them are in Sir Riftan's possession. Maxi's eyes grew wide as Ruth continued to boast. Sir Riftan found them 6 years ago. During that time, he hunted monsters like a madman and collected all sorts of treasures. It was in a lair in the canyons of Osiria that he came across 200 dant coins, the most valuable of his finds. Of the 200, he spent 40 on building the castle walls, repairing the castle, oh my god, itself, and paving the roads in the village. He was able to do that with just 40 coins? 20 would have sufficed, but Sir Riftan paid the workers several times the usual wage to expedite construction. Ruth made no attempt to hide his displeasure. You've known Riftan for a long time. Since he was nothing but a lowly mercenary, it's been nearly 12 years. Maxi was intrigued by the revelation. 12 years ago, Riftan would have been 16. Had he really become a mercenary so young? She knew that Riftan had been knighted at the age of 18, and doing so typically required at least 3 years of training and an additional year of dedicated swordsmanship under another knight's guidance. But we've digressed, Ruth said. Let's return to the task at hand, my lady. We must finish before the merchant arrives. Swallowing her lingering questions, Maxi nodded and buried her nose in the ledger once again. Aderon was visibly upset when Maxi canceled some of the orders, and though he made several eloquent attempts to persuade her to reconsider, she stood her ground, just remembering how Ruth had scowled at her immoderate spending gave her courage. In the end, the merchant heaved a sigh of surrender and drafted a new statement. Oh my god. No. Hey, no. Oh my god, you are making this so difficult. While Maxi tried to estimate the total cost, it dawned on her that she would be paying with piles of the gleaming coins that Ruth had shown her earlier. It was no small sum. With a renewed sense of responsibility, she signed the receipt and gathered the rolls of parchment. Later, in the library, Ruth looked relieved when Maxi told him that everything had gone well. May I see the receipt? Nodding, she passed him the piece of parchment. Oh my god. I see the fellow isn't entirely unprincipled. He idly tapped his lips as he examined the page. He's rather persistent, but he's not a bad person. Anyone can pretend to be a paragon of virtue when it comes to lining their pockets. As he pulled out a chair to sit at the table, Maxi sat down across from him and rolled her eyes at his cynical remark. The sorcerer was far more ill-tempered and sharp-tongued than his soft features suggested. Though Ruth was noisier and more talkative than Riftan, both men had undeniably difficult personalities. Oh my god. Please record the transaction in the ledger, Ruth instructed. I'll help you make any necessary corrections. All right. Maxi obeyed without questioning his authority. This calculation is wrong, he said almost immediately. Oh, I'm sorry, Ruth silently observed as she scratched away with the quill. When she made another error, he pressed a hand to his forehead and tapped one corner of the ledger with the other. She hastily corrected the mistake, but he pointed again to the section above it. This unit here is wrong. I'm sorry. Try to keep the accounts as detailed as possible. We want to avoid confusion once they're settled. I understand. Here, your spelling is wrong, and please refrain from sprawling. These are official records that will be passed down for generations. Maxi withered under his criticism. Not even the tutor that Duke Croyso hired had been so strict with her. When she finished writing, Ruth slid the ledger closer to himself and looked over the numbers as if he were reviewing her homework. This is acceptable. He let out an exaggerated exhale as he closed the book. Now that all of the issues had been addressed, my lady, I'd like to ask that you not disturb my sleep. Maxi rolled her eyes again. Did the sorcerer always sleep in the library? Hadn't Riftan mentioned that his quarters were in the tower? But it was not her place to interfere, so she did not question him. She hesitated a long while before speaking again. We also decided to renovate the gardens for next spring. Riftan lifted his eyes to the ceiling in exasperation, but Maxi continued to look at him pleadingly. For days she had toiled over this endeavor, alone, no less, and she was at her wit's end. Having suffered all manner of humiliation, she had nothing else to lose. And repair the annex, she added meekly. Ruth clutched his head, regretting that he had ever offered his assistance. From then on, Ruth oversaw Maxi's bookkeeping. Every day she would enter the library and silently hover over him as he slept in the corner, and every day he would rise from his pile of books, grumbling that he never should have intervened in the first place. Still, he studied the ledger meticulously and advised her on the purchases. Though his advice bordered on nagging, his assistance proved to be invaluable, and Maxi found herself turning to him for even turning to him for even the most trivial problems. When Maxi told him of her plans for the garden, however, he looked concerned. The servants will be troubled if you order the removal of the tree by the pavilion. But it's dead, she said, confused. It doesn't even grow leaves. Anatolians believe that nymphs inhabit trees, so they're weary of uprooting them, even dead ones. Logging is considered sacrilegious. If you were to order that tree's removal for aesthetic reasons, people would be horrified. But Maxi trailed off, perplexed. Wouldn't they understand if we told them that the tree would be used for fuel? Look how hideous it is. They'd probably accept it. Ruth rubbed his chin, the corners of his eyes crinkling. If that tree wasn't an oak. What's so special about oak trees? Anatolians hold dear the legend of Sir Riftan, the first knight to have flown across the sky on a dragon. Oh my God. That hill is supposedly where Wigru mounted his dragon before he set off for the last time. Ruth gestured to the steep hill outside the window as he spoke, and Maxi's eyes went round. Of course she was familiar with the legend of Wigru, the man to whom God had granted the holy sword Ascalon and to end the war against darkness. The very hero who had united the western realms under the banner of the Roman Empire before ascending to the heavens. He was a recurring figure in the children's bedtime stories, and the scene of Wigru flying into the sky on a white dragon had been immortalized in countless ballads and paintings. Maxi's eyes sparkled with wonder at the knowledge that this place of legend was right outside her door. Is the legend really true? The Anatolians believe so, though there's no historical evidence. But what does that have to do with oak trees? Well, the story goes that Wigru fell in love with the nymph of that very oak tree, and the Anatolians believe that that nymph is still there, patiently waiting for his return. Every spring festival, all of the maidens take to the hills to sing songs of praise for the nymph's love and devotion. So that's why people here don't cut down oak trees. Ruth nodded in confirmation. Still, Maxi could not help feeling that the dead tree marred the appearance of the castle's main entrance. Would the people really be so disgruntled if I had it removed? The people of Anatol revere Wigru and anything associated with him. Most will likely resent the decision. Maxi frowned, remembering how they had cheered Rosam Wigru the day of Riftan's return. Sensing her distress, Ruth sighed. I'll see if I can revive it. Once it grows leaves, it won't look as bad as it does now. You can do that? The lives of plants are very different from those of humans. They sometimes appear dead when they're simply dormant. If we infuse the tree with mana, he pursed his lips with a dismissive scratch of his head, as if offering her an explanation would be too tedious. I can't make guarantees, but we could at least spread the word that your ladyship has enlisted the help of a sorcerer to revive the sacred oak. Even if the experiment ends in failure, it will be enough to placate the servants. His cynical tone made her pause. Are you suggesting I care too much about how the servants perceive me? That wasn't my intention. It's natural for the lady of the castle to try to earn her servants' respects, especially when she hasn't been here long. Ruth's answer was uncharacteristically kind, but the reassurance only made Maxi feel more puzzled than relieved. She had grown used to his backhanded remarks. Her eyes traced nervous lines around the library, not sure where to direct her gaze. Then I suppose I'll leave it to you. Immediately, Ruth looked as if he regretted volunteering for such a bothersome task. All I want, my lady, is for this tedious project to end so that I can return to my routine in peace. All right. That is chapter 5. We will continue with chapter 6 in another stream later. Let's see, how long is chapter 6? Oh, okay. Yeah, this is what I was meaning about chapters being thick. There's one thick girl. Here we go. All right. So once again, that was Under the Oak Tree. It is written by Suji Kim. And this is volume 1. It is just wonderful. I love it. We will continue with this another day. As it just falls right over. That's great. Ta-da! Okay. I will see you guys again for another reading another day.